in the middle here. There you go.
Right, I call the August 9th, 2023 meeting of the Southfield Personnel Board to order. Comment, I have a hard stop at 10. So hopefully we can get through everything. First order of business is approval of the minutes that were circulated. Any changes, John?
It says that I voted aye, but I abstained because I wasn't here for that meeting.
Okay, which one are you talking about?
The approval of the June 28th
Okay,
meeting. I abstained. I wasn't here for that meeting.
right, I remember. Okay, we'll make that change. Any other changes, corrections to the minutes? Okay, with that change, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We have to
Gonna do a roll call vote.
roll call vote. Mr. Thorburn,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Zinsky,
Aye.
chair votes aye. Are approved. Next in the packet is the expenditure ledger. No funds were expended. So I don't think there's any need to spend any time on that. 3A, I wanted to update the board on the status of the handbook. So John and I met with Kate last week, and we have another meeting scheduled for next week. So we're making progress there. My hope is to have a version for the board to review at our next meeting. I would suggest to everyone that they take the time between now and then to review the document that you got at the last meeting. So, because I don't know what the timing is going to be. And so that way you'll only have to look at the red line changes. So I would urge everyone to do that. Lastly, I have been struggling since the beginning in figuring out what our role is with regard to the handbook. Because I don't think the personnel bylaw gives us the authority to adopt any policies other than those related to compensation and benefits. And as you know, there are a lot of policies in the handbook that go well beyond that. However, if you look at the town manager bylaw, the town relevant part says that the town administrator bylaw, town administrative bylaw says that the town administrator will act as personnel director, and then says, with the guidance and oversight of the personnel board, the town administrator shall develop, maintain, and administer the personnel bylaw, which shall be approved annually at the town meeting, and which includes, but is not limited to, classification system, compensation system. Okay, we're fine there. That's what the personnel bylaw says. But then it says personnel rules and regulations which indicate the rights and obligations of employees, disciplinary procedures, personal appraisal system, development and implementation of an ongoing training program, and any other personnel and hiring policies, practices, and regulations for town employees not covered by collective bargaining agreements. Now, to my mind, a lot of those things are not included in the personnel bylaw. So my thinking on this has evolved. What I now think is the handbook is really the personnel director's bylaw. Is his document. However, he develops it under the oversight of the personnel board. So we do have a role to play in it. This is important because it gets to what we want to take out of the SAP. And we discussed this at the last meeting, and I think consensus was we should take a whole lot of stuff out of the SAP. I now think, because the handbook is really not our document, that we shouldn't take a lot of things out of the SAP. And because because it's not clear to me what the rationale is for doing that. We originally thought we want to take things out of the SAP because we want to have the flexibility to make changes outside of town meeting. But I don't really see what we would be changing with regard to the provisions we're taking out. And if we're going to go to town meeting with an SAP that has half of its guts removed, I want to have a pretty good reason for explaining to people why we're doing that, because I think people who normally might not pay attention are going to look and say, what's going on here? And frankly, as I sit here, I don't have a good reason for taking it out. So my thinking has switched to the point where I'd be inclined to pretty much leave everything in the SAP and just see the handbook as a separate standalone document. But as we move forward in revising the draft handbook, it's important that we sort of be on the same page because it dictates how we do the handbook. Because we were starting down the road of just taking things out of the SAP and putting them in handbook as opposed to just referencing provisions in the SAP. So Kate asked for, and I think we owe her direction on how we want to do that. So again, I evolved on it, but I'd like to hear others. And I know John's, I sort of moved to John's position, which was to leave these things in. So I'll open that up.
I don't want to use the word totally, but I fully agree with you. That we ought to leave the SAP the way it is. Just think of what we've been working on this handbook for 2 years. And we're getting there, but I was very impressed with Ms. Fedorov. She seemed that remains to be seen if she's incorporated, the changes we wanted to make, but to go through taking stuff out of that bylaw, SAP, trying to explain that to everybody, and I don't think it's necessary. I think we ought to leave it. That the handbook should be a guide for our employees. They can refer to, but it shouldn't be costly. That would be something that Mark could change policy. He doesn't have to go to the town meeting to change the policy that was voted.
I'm actually in complete agreement with you. I don't want to change the SAP, and to me, the handbook is a guide for the employees to refer to it if they have questions about just simple questions. Otherwise, they need to go to Mark as I completely agree with you.
And I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement too with one recommendation is that as Kate goes through the process, given that she sees this a heck of a lot more than any one of us, if there is one or two sections that really are not fit for purpose in the SAP going forward because you have this handbook, then I'd be willing to listen. But I'm not. I'm with you. There shouldn't be wholesale changes, but I don't think we should just close the door on it either. If there is just something that doesn't make sense to be in there anymore, I think she just needs to make a recommendation to us, and then that gives you your speech for town meeting if we choose to move forward on it.
I agree with that. To the extent there is something that just doesn't make sense in the SAP.
I'm sorry. If we adopt this handbook, it's lax policy, purple policies,
Right.
and he would run any changes to those policies that he wanted by the personnel board?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, because we still have the oversight responsibility. He administers the policies, but we create them sort of jointly. So, good, that's good progress. Okay, moving on to 4A, it's just one resignation.
Yeah, just a short report for you this month, regarding lottery associate Alicia Linsky, who, is resigned from her position due to her, other job. Right, outside of that.
Thank you. All right, moving on, 5A, this has to do with the dispatchers, who were the only group we didn't get to. The chief is here. I don't know if you want to say anything.
I don't need to.
Okay. We have the certifications, the correct amounts, I think the new rates are incorrect on page 6. They're correct on the certification sheets. So I'm going to just go through that. I'll make a motion for each of the 3 of them as part of one motion, and then we can vote on it. So I would move to increase the pay rate for the following dispatchers, retroactive to July 1. I would, that would be Nadia Badenhausen, from 2266 to 2357. Nancy Dote, from 2266 to 2357. And Charles Goodwin from 2435 to 2532. Is there a second?
Second.
What were those new rates? They're not what we got printed here?
Okay, the new rates. The first 2, it's.
Oh, I don't have.
The first 2, John, are the new rate is 2357. And the last one is 2532. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Just the 4%. Okay, roll call vote, Mr. Thorburn,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Mr. Densky.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, those are approved. Okay, so as we discussed at the last meeting, we're trying to figure out ways to think about how we would implement a salary grid. And so there are 2 sort of, I'll call them thought processes in the documents you have. And let me go through the first one. And this is the one that has columns A through M. So with this attempts to do, let me say, this is just an example, and it uses 2%. Wholly picked out a full cloth. The board has made no decision. No one should read anything into the fact that we're using 2% for this example. It's just for purposes of discussion. Okay, so this takes people, increases the grid that we were looking at for FY23 by 2%, places them on the grid, and then moves them to the steps that is closest to but not below where they would fall. So going through, you see the 2% increase, what that brings them, that's column C. Column D is what would be the next step on the grid, and it shows the percentage increase they would actually get. Column F shows how much just the 2% increase costs. That's $69,000. Column G is how much putting them on the grid. After that cost, it's 26,000. And column H is the total of those two. Columns L and M are really trying to focus on what the impact is. So you'll see in column M, for example, that there are some employees who miss the lower step by quite a small amount. 2 cents, 1 cent. And what the impact of that is, that they end up getting 3.8, 3.9 instead of the 2%. So that's just to show that you could, if we choose to, and again, there are a number of approaches we could take. If we choose to, we could have some kind of cutoff that said if you were within 5 cents or 10 cents, whatever, of the lower step, you would get the lower step instead of moving up to the higher step, which would mean that you would still get the 2%, but you wouldn't necessarily get 3.8 or 3.9%. Again, just one approach, and if you use a number other than 2%, the column M would look different. It would be, we don't know how many people would be impacted. We won't know that until we sort of decide what we're going to do with the grid in terms of increasing it. So again, just for discussion. The other chart you have is just showing if we use the grid, and Jason, jump in here if I have left something out. So this is saying if you just kept the grid we had been looking at for FY23 and placed people on that grid, and just did that, putting them on in the grid at the step closest to but not below where they would fall. These are the numbers that come out, and the cost of doing that is 44,000 roughly. Is that what, Jason, if I said that correctly?
I don't agree with the cost, but I don't think we should focus on the cost today. I think we should talk about the concept. But yes,
Yeah.
that concept's correct. Basically, everyone has a pay rate today. It's within the ranges that are adopted in the SAP. And we had a grid that fell within those. So trying to match people to that. In which case people would see somewhere between a 0% to a 1.9% potential impact just to go on the grid, because I think it gets very confusing when we start throwing around hypothetical increases for next year. So I'd say if we can actually deal with actual data that we know people are getting paid this year and a grid that we know falls within the ranges that come out of the study we did last year, that would be the simplest way to adopt the grid. And my sole goal here is, well, cost will ultimately be a factor. I don't think it's the gating factor. I think it's a fairness factor to make sure we're as fair as possible to all employees. So that was kind of the approach I wanted to go down, just to achieve that fairness aspect more than anything else.
Okay, but I get from a fairness perspective, how is it different? In other words, so you're still getting a 2%, roughly 2% variance between people, right? Just as you would using the first example. So I'm not understanding how it deals with the fairness.
So let me give it a simple example. Let's just say we have someone in A7 this year, and they're at the minimum of that range. To me, they are A7 step 1 this year, even though we don't call them that. Therefore, next year, they'll become A7 step 2. whatever that rate is, that's a 0% cost to put them on the grid. And it moves them fairly on whatever interval we think the grid should go. Now, I realize everyone's not going to be that perfect example, but unfortunately, we have a ton of people that are at the minimum of their range, which makes them super easy to put on the grid.
Yeah, yes and no, because are you putting them at step 1 or step 2?
I'm assigning a hypothetical grade for this year, which would be A7 step 1. Then next year for FY25, they would move to A7 step 2.
And actually this came up when we were doing the first chart with Brian, because he had taken that approach that people who were theoretically at step 1 for FY25 would be step 2. But if you look at, let's take library pages, just because they're an easy one. So if you move them to, again, looking at the first example, if you move them to step 2, instead of getting a 2% increase, they would get a 4% increase. And keep in mind, I raised them, and again, we're not talking about a lot of money here, but I think of all the people, the library pages got the largest percentage increase by moving them to the minimums last year. I think they went from 11 something an hour to 15. And now to give them, and again, I just cite this example, but now to give them another, again, hypothetically 4% when everyone else is getting 2%. It just seems to me we are over rewarding them, and I get concerned because we had a problem with our minimums, as Mary recognized. We moved up all the minimums, and we moved the number of people up to the minimums, and that had the impact of the effect of compressing the pay rates, so that there are people who were mid-range or higher who didn't see that big increase, but yet people at the bottom who did. And Mary recommended we make the ranges smaller, which we did. So we in my mind, sort of taking care of the people at the bottom. If they're going to get another increase larger than other people, we're compressing it further, and I think we're being unfair to people who are already in the grid, so to speak. And the library pages, again, because they don't make much money, they don't work a lot of hours, but just an example, I think really illustrates what's happening there, if that makes sense to people.
I think, Barry, for these purposes, just for simplicity for a second, we need to assume a COLA of 0. We all know that's not the case, but you have to assume a COLA of 0. So in your example, that person would have been A1, step 1 in FY24, which is the current year, if we had a grid system. They naturally would have moved to A1, step 2 in FY25, which would be an automatic 2% increase. If we didn't touch the grid, they automatically get 2%. So it's like a fundamental that's built in. Anyone that's on the grid that's not maxed out is always going to see a 2% increase in a 0% COLA year. I just want to make sure everyone's working with that same fact.
Right, but we don't have a grid. So why are we treating people as if they're already placed on the grid that we don't have?
Because we were 95% there and we essentially had people on the grid and ran out of time. And I think you're going to end up with a fairer result, because once you start adding these COLA, whether you call it 2%, 1%, or 3%, then you're going to start creating situations where someone's going to miss a grade by a cent, 2 cents, either direction, and could see an artificial increase.
But I'm still struggling with, and again, I have problems with numbers, as I've said before, so this is my being dense, not you being unclear. We're still seeing the essentially 2% disparity between people that I thought we were trying to address, and it's not clear to me how this addresses.
I think there's a formula error in the spreadsheet you're looking at. So what I would suggest is that I work with Brian in between meetings and we put a side by side of the two options for each party, right? So using each of these they're real employees, but we don't have names on them, and just show what the impact is. But I would suggest we go with a 0% COLA for now, just to address the concept of putting people on the grid. And then if we decide to adjust the COLA, we can deal with that after. But I think you need it side by side to understand it. But I do think there's a fundamental flaw in this original sheet that anyone that's at 2% should actually be at 0 in the version of using the FY24 rates. The FY25 rates with a 2% to start, I think is fine. But I think you need to see it side by side, which is tough to do the way it's presented right now. And I'm happy to work with Brian offline in between meetings to show you that, but I can see where your confusion is.
Okay, no, that would be helpful, because I said, I'm not wedded to any approach other than I'd like to have something that's more, in my mind, more equitable than sort of what we have been doing. So happy to consider that. And if you're willing to work with Brian on that, that would be great. Any other comments?
Correct me as I go along, if I'm wrong. We paid the Commons Foundation to set up a proper scale for everybody where they are now and everything. And we put them on their proper grade, A grade, A1, A4, whatever. Okay. I be honest with you, all these things just with me. But correct me again if I'm wrong. The people that are getting these so-called, what you're calling unfair raises compared to others, are those our long-term employees?
No, it's completely arbitrary. It has nothing to do with length of service or anything. It's just completely arbitrary where they fall on the grid.
But they fall on based on their grade.
Yeah, for example, library pages, as I was pointing out, would get a 4%, where other people would get 2%. So it has nothing to do with anything regarding their employment. That's the issue for me, that it's completely arbitrary, and some people end up getting twice as much of an increase, twice as much a percentage increase as other people for no reason other than they missed a step by 1 cent.
Okay, I know Jason already spoke that he wasn't worried, wasn't going to discuss the cost. That wasn't important, but the cost is important. I think right off the top that we ought to adopt these grades where they fall. would be a heck of a lot harder. Do whatever readjustments would have to be done. In accordance with your thoughts. Where is that figure that if we just adopted it where they fall? Where, how much of a cost is that?
25,000.
I say spend the money.
We'll have time to talk about this right now. I'm just trying to get at how we want to proceed. Brianne?
I'm also dazzled by the way this is set up. I'd like to see it the way Jason is suggesting, so we can see it in real form. I don't understand what's happening here. Just throwing all these numbers like this is. I see what's happening. I understand what's going on. I want to see a real living document that really shows us what's happening with these. This isn't helping me at all.
All right, so for the next meeting, we'll have another document that hopefully will be more informative. And we can start to focus in on an approach. Again, the idea is just we need to have a dialogue. Go ahead, John.
I hate to see. Like if we're gonna try to adjust it, it makes. Brian goes through all kinds of manipulations, all kinds of, work. Taking up time. We've got nothing but time to give, so. But we go through all this with almost everything we do. We spend a lot of time try to get to the end, but I think a lot of time, too much time. We'd be better off biting the bullet, going ahead.
And it's fair. It's just for me, and I don't think I'm alone on this. If we're doing things, I'd like to be as equitable as we can be with employees. And if there are things we can do to make it, for want of a better word, fairer across the board, and we should consider them. Doesn't mean we have to do them, but we should take the time to think about other ways to do it that would employees would see as fairer than just arbitrarily saying you get 4%, you get 2%. That's all. All right, anything more on that topic? Okay, we really don't have anything on 5C. The CPI information was not available. So that sort of completes the business for this meeting. Again, I would urge people to read through the draft handbook that you have so that in September, we're in a position to spend a fair amount of time going through that, make sure we're comfortable. Doesn't mean it's the last chance you'll have, but I'd like people to be prepared to offer their comments at that meeting. Is there any other business? Okay, any public comments? No. Our next meeting, I believe, is scheduled for September 13th. Does that still work for everybody?
I will have to zoom in.
Okay. John, does that work for you?
No problem.
Okay, Jason?
That works for me.
Okay. If you want to discuss October,
Yeah, I wanted to see if the board would be willing to look at it. I'm not going to be here the second week.
okay. So we could look at,
Eighteenth would be the third Tuesday.
yeah, can,
Wednesday.
can people
Sorry,
make,
Wednesday.
can people make the 18th?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But change it to eighteenth of October.
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Jason,
That works.
okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. For a second,
Second,
all in favor, Mr. Thorburn,
I.
Mr. Malinowski,
Right.
Jasinski.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, we are adjourned. Safe travels, Jason.
Thank you.
Travels, Jay.